Hi everybody, I'm Gloria Duffy from the Commonwealth Club. Happy to welcome you to the first session today, when we're going to talk about the state of our democracy. I'd just like to say on behalf of the Commonwealth Club, we're very happy to be participating in this overall focus on democracy issues, hosting one of today's speaker at the Commonwealth Club. The Commonwealth Club and the JCF and JCRC are next door neighbors on the Barquera. We're metaphorically next door neighbors as well as physically in our joint pursuit of a healthy civil society. I also, since some other supervisors and former supervisors were acknowledged, I'd like to acknowledge my husband, Ron Duradon, the former chair of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors and a longtime crusader for human rights. There are many definitions of democracy. In fact, I think we will have many definitions tried out today and discussed. Let me try out my own definition. Democracy is both a system, a process, and a set of outcomes that emerge from that system. The system and process is designed to be representative, fair, honest, and equitable. The outcomes should provide the greatest good for the greatest number, promote prosperity, equity, and justice. If the process doesn't work, then sooner or later, the outcomes will not occur. So our first panel will discuss the current state of our democracy, how well it is or isn't working, how well it is or isn't working for whom, and where it is at risk. We have a terrific panel, a bipartisan group, all of them legal experts and having served in government in various capacities. Bassin, Wendy Weiser, and Nikki Edwards. Let me briefly introduce them, although you will find them in your booklet for today, so no long introductions. Bassin, you heard from, am I pronouncing that correct? Bassin, Bassin, who is Executive Director of the Protect Democracy Project. He served as Associate White House Counsel from 2009 to 2011. He counseled the President and senior White House staff on administrative and constitutional law. He ensured that the White House and executive branch officials complied with the laws, rules, and norms that protect the fundamentally democratic nature of our government. His JD is from Yale Law School, where he was an editor of the Yale Law Journal and president of the American Constitution Society. He'll tell you a little bit more about, I think, the Protect Democracy Project, which is a very interesting and impactful project in this current environment. Wendy Weiser, am I pronouncing that correctly? Weiser, so far I'm 0 for 2, is Director of the Democracy Project Program at the Brennan Center for Justice at the NYU School of Law, which is a nonpartisan think tank and public interest law center that works to revitalize, reform, and defend the systems of democracy and justice. Her program focuses on voting rights and elections, money in politics and ethics, redistricting and representation, government dysfunction, rule of law, and fair courts. She founded and directed the program's Voting Rights and Elections Project, which directs litigation, research, and advocacy efforts to enhance political participation and prevent voter disenfranchisement across the country. Prior to joining the Brennan Center, she was a senior attorney at the Now Legal Defense and Education Fund, where she worked on issues of access to the courts and domestic violence. And she was a litigation associate at Paul, Weiser, and Garrison, and a law clerk to Judge Eugene H. Nickerson in the United States District Court, the Eastern District of New York. She's another Yalee. Her JD is from the Yale Law School and her BA from Yale College. Nikki Edwards, I'm fairly confident I'm pronouncing that correctly, was a member of Congress for 16 years. He served on the House Budget and Appropriations Committee and is chairman of the House Republican Policy Committee. After leaving Congress, he taught for 11 years at the Kennedy School at Harvard, then moved to Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, then back to Washington as vice president of the Aspen Institute, where he directs a bipartisan fellowship for public elected officials. He grew up in Oklahoma. He has degrees in both law and journalism. He started out as a newspaper editor and reporter. He's a board member of the Constitution Project, where he's chaired task forces on judicial independence and war powers, and the Project on Government Oversight. He was a member of the American Bar Association's Select Task Force on the use of presidential signing statements, and the American Society of International Law's Task Force on the International Criminal Court. He's chaired policy task forces for the Brookings Institution and the Council on Foreign Relations. He's written several books, including Reclaiming Conservatism, published by Oxford University Press, and The Parties versus the People, How to Turn Republicans and Democrats into Americans, published by Yale University Press. So without further ado, we're going to ask our three panelists to make some initial presentations, starting with Ian.
People hear me okay? Yeah. Great. So I referenced when I opened earlier that we're in a bit of a scary and challenging moment for democracy around the world with the situation not just in the United States, but India and Brazil. I think for me, and this may be true for some of you in the room, November 2016 was a bit of a wake-up call on just what is going on globally about the state of democracy. I will admit, I served under President Barack Obama and a progressive Democrat, so my first reaction to the election of Donald Trump was one of partisan and ideological concern. But it was very quickly after that that a group of former White House lawyers, Department of Justice attorneys, who were concerned about the norms that we had presided over as lawyers in the executive branch, are concerned about what would happen if you actually had a political movement, an administration, a president who was not as committed to abiding by those things. We're really introducing our eyes open to the fact that what we were looking at in the United States was actually not unique to the United States. Donald Trump, as you may have heard over the last couple of months from political leaders who are starting to adopt this language, is really symptom, not cause, of the challenge that our democracy is facing. So let me put this in a little bit of context of what we at Protect Democracy have come to realize in the last 2+ years. Freedom House, which is a fairly right-of-center nonprofit that was formed to study democracy around the world after World War II, has tracked the spread of democracy and the quality of democracy around the world. And its data shows that over the latter half of the 20th century, democracy was on the march. It spread to more countries and improved in the countries that it was in, up until 2005. When you look at Freedom House data in 2005, the state of democracy around the world begins to go into retreat. The stories we are familiar with in Turkey, in Hungary, and Poland only tell part of the story. Even in Western Europe, you are seeing anti-democratic parties rise in states like Germany, Sweden, France, the UK, and basically take over in places like Italy. The United States was suffering a similar trend in the data on our state of our democracy dating back to 2011. The same Freedom House data shows that in the United States, the quality of our democracy, according to their data, peaks in 2011 under the administration of the president that I served under, and begins to go into decline. So what's happening? What's going on? Well, consider this. In 1995, 1 in 16 Americans said they would be comfortable with the concept of military rule in the United States. 1 in 16. In 2011, that number was 1 in 6. That entire shift was millennials. Only 30% of Americans under 30 believe that democracy is a necessary form of government. For Americans over 70, that number is 75%. No democracy in history has survived its founding majority demographic becoming a minority population. And yet, white Americans will become a minority somewhere between 2040 and 2044. And according to some research from Brookings and others, anywhere between 30% and 50% of American jobs could be lost over the next 20 years. So we are witnessing almost a perfect storm of things coming together to challenge our democracy. A rising generation that is not as committed to democratic principles as the generations that came before it. Incredible fear over the changing demographics of this country, and incredible anxiety over the scarcity of resources that might be available for the next generation. These things are not just happening in the United States, they're happening largely in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and they're spreading to other parts of the world as well. This is what caused us to form Protect Democracy. Realizing that at the time we formed in late 2016, early 2017, there was not that we could identify an organization in the United States exclusively and holistically focused on how to learn the lessons of this global trend and prevent the slide of American democracy into something more authoritarian. How do we think about this challenge? How do we think about what we might do about it? So we've assembled a group of advisors, many of whom are going to speak here today, who have studied the decline of democracies in countries whose fall is preceding ours. And we asked them, what does the roadmap look like? What is the blueprint for a movement that attempts to dismantle democracy? And interestingly, they all had a very similar set of answers of what this looks like. And they boiled down to about 6 things. I think the hypothetical I put to several of the people, Aziz, who's speaking later today, and Yasha, two of them, was, if I told you that Jared Kushner won the 2024 election with 75% of the vote, what would you tell me had to have happened between now and then? The first scary thing was none of them paused. None of them questioned it. They all said, well, I'll tell you exactly how that's going to happen, because that's exactly what's happened in other countries that I've studied. And they said basically 6 things are going to happen. First, you're going to see the autocratic leader attempt to politicize independent institutions like law enforcement, civil service, and the military. Think about the president's attacks on the FBI, the Department of Justice, and other kind of that behavior overseas. Second, you're going to see the government attempt to put out deliberate disinformation to confuse the public and make it harder for the public to hold them accountable to the truth. Third, you're going to see the executive attempt to aggrandize power in the hands of the president and undermine the ability of other checking institutions like Congress, the courts, the press, the private sector, and citizen activists to hold them to account. Fourth, you're going to see novel ways of quashing dissent. The way that we're used to in this country, when we think about silencing dissent or censorship, when we think about the traditional things, the First Amendment was designed to protect against, we're used to things like the government censoring speech. But what they warned us is these modern autocrats have much more creative ways of censoring speech. So what you see in places like Egypt or Bahrain is if an activist begins to speak up, the government doesn't simply try to silence them directly. The government reaches out to their business customers and says, you don't want to shop there anymore. The government slows their shipments down to port so it becomes harder to do business. The government speaks to their friends and family and says, you don't want to associate with that person anymore. Think about the president threatening NFL owners with their tax status unless they silence what the players do. Think about the president calling up ESPN and firing the anchor Janelle Help, what she said. Think about the president threatening the postal rates of Amazon in order to bring Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post to give him more favorable coverage. Fifth, you'll see these autocrats try to delegitimize vulnerable minority populations. Why is that? Because it turns out in a lot of these countries, autocratic leaders actually come to power with plurality support, not majority support. So when the Law and Justice Party first came to power in Poland, they rose with the support of 18% of the Polish population because of the fragmentation of the Polish political system. Think about the Republican primary in 2016 and how the divided fields would allow Donald Trump to ascend. So what do? Well, if you're trying to claim you have a mandate to govern and you only command plurality support, let's say hypothetically, I don't know, you lose the popular vote and need to prove you have a mandate. You say, well, 34 million people voted illegally. Probably people will come. And then, if you eliminate those people, well, you have a majority of the mandate. And then sixth and finally, these modern autocrats do something differently than their 20th century brethren. In the 20th century, when autocrats came to power, they eliminated democracy altogether. They became totalitarian dictators. The 21st century movement realized that the concept of democracy is so steeped in the global consciousness that they cannot do that. So what they do is they create something, I love this term, they create protecting democracies. Democracies that at least look to be democracies on the surface, but are not when you look behind them. So think about this. In Hungary, Viktor Orban, in that are all talking about Sisi in Turkey, Erdogan in Venezuela, Maduro, all won elections this year. Vladimir Putin won elections here. Were these real elections? Of course not. Sisi got a member of the Duffy party to run as a puppet against him. So they pull the threads out of the fairness, the freedom, and the totally informed nature in which elections can take place in order to make sure those elections deliver a preordained result. We're seeing all of those things happen in these days. In fact, we're seeing them happen faster than they happen in places like Turkey or Russia. Think about both when Erdogan came to power in Turkey and when Putin came to power in Russia. People thought they would be democratic reformers. Erdogan was going to bring Turkey into the European Union. Putin was going to carry out Boris Yeltsin's reforms. It took 5 or 6 years before people realized they had much more autocratic tendencies. We're seeing all 6 of these things happen between the first 2 years of the current administration. So that's a little bit of the landscape of the challenge that we're facing. Fear not. Over the course of the day, we're going to talk about some solutions. We're going to start by identifying the problem in order to talk about solutions. I want to pause there, and I think over the course of the conversation, we'll talk about what we can do about this. The truth is, we can turn this moment from a crisis into an opportunity. We can use this moment to learn these lessons, see where our guardrails are weak, recognizing that the United States has stronger and more robust traditions than these other countries that I've mentioned, and that we can use them, turn to them, and reinforce them to ensure that we actually pass on a stronger and healthier democracy to the next generation.
Wow, thank you. That makes clear what some of our tasks and objectives need to be. Wendy?
Well, thank you, and it's really a delight to be here listening to conference organizers. And that was a great lead-in to what I'm going to talk about, which is how the decline in liberal democracy has been playing out here in the United States, not just over the past 2 years, but over the course of more than a decade, through the lens of our battles for voting rights, fair legislative maps, and fair courts. And again, this has been going on across the states for the better part now of 2 decades. And I'm going to focus my opening remarks like being on the bad news, but there actually is a lot of good news and hopeful momentum, which I hope to get to before we close. And so I'll start with just a big snapshot of where things stand now, heading into the 2018 midterm elections. On the voting front, voters in 24 states are going to find it harder to vote this year than they did in 2010 because of, over the past decade, there was a wave of laws that imposed new hurdles to voting. And some of those voters will face strict voter ID requirements, things where they won't be able to cast a ballot that will count unless they show one of a narrow list of government-issued photo IDs that 10% of the population don't. Others are going to face polling places that have been closed, reduced voting hours, new hurdles to voter registration, and a variety of other hurdles. And these legal obstacles aren't the only obstacles they're going to face. Many are going to show up at the polls. They're going to find that their names have been eliminated from the voter roll due to aggressive voter roll purges, where attempt to supposedly cull the voter rolls of ineligible voters. States have aggressively removed the names of millions of voters, many of whom were in fact eligible. We've seen that increase immensely over the past decade. And not even people who research, for example, shows that in Georgia, just since the last election, 11% of voters have been removed from the voter roll. Georgia's in the news a lot right now because of new voter registration hurdles that are the object of litigation pending the election. But that's not the only obstacle in that state. And for many who would otherwise vote, these hurdles are going to prove to be too much. And they either won't vote or their votes won't count. And this isn't just hypothetical. After these hurdles have been in place now for a number of years, there is a growing body of research that shows that they actually do reduce participation. The most recent study to come out was just about a week or 2 ago out of Wisconsin, showing that in 2016 elections, somewhere between 11,000 and 23,000 votes were thwarted because of that state's strict voter ID requirement. And that was a state that Donald Trump won by only 22,000 votes. So it has an impact on participation. And it's gotten worse since 2016. So since 2016 now, 9 more states are going to face greater hurdles to voting than they did in that election. And so that's just the voting story. But that's not the only way in which our elections are going to be distorted this year. the congressional districts in 6 states and the state legislative districts in more than a dozen states are skewed by extreme partisan gerrymandering heading into this election cycle. And that means that the district lines have been manipulated to ensure that one party wins a majority, and in many cases, the super majority of the seats, even regardless of whether they win a majority of the votes for those seats. And so we're seeing the starkest examples of those problems, and you've probably heard about these, are in both Wisconsin and in North Carolina, 2 very closely divided states, and all of these states are hotly contested battleground states that tend to vote equally for Democrat and Republican on a statewide level. That despite that relative equal distribution of votes statewide, North Carolina has managed, the Republicans have managed to guarantee 10 of the state's 13 congressional seats for the entirety of this decade. In Wisconsin, the Republicans have guaranteed more than 60% of the state's assembly seats throughout the entire decade, again, even when they won less than a majority of votes. And so this impact obviously has a dramatic disconnect between voter preferences and their representatives. It reduces political accountability and responsiveness, but it also can skew outcomes, and that is precisely their point. And our research shows that actually 16 to 17 seats in the current U.S. House of Representatives Republicans have an advantage because of extreme gerrymandering in just 6 states. For those 16 to 17 seats, that's a major chunk of the 24 seats they need. That's 24 seat advantage that they have currently in the House of Representatives. And so that's on the redistricting front. But looking at the courts, now after a very deeply polarized confirmation process over the Supreme Court justice, we're also heading into an election in which 29 states are going to face very politicized elections for their state's highest courts. And this is and we've seen a real growth in the politicization of those elections at the state level for the better part of 2 decades. And we've seen the trends that we saw during the Kavanaugh confirmation process, hyper-partisanship, multi-million-dollar spending by outside groups, many of which are dark money groups, attack ads. These have been building, again, in state courts for a long time. We've seen, since we started tracking spending in judicial races, since about 1999, there was only a handful of states where there was a sitting Supreme Court justice that had been through a multi-million-dollar race. Now we have 20 states with courts that have sitting justices that have been through $1 million or more races, and that number is poised to increase dramatically going into this election. In addition, we tracked in the last election, 40% of all spending in state judicial races came from outside groups that were dark money groups, that less than a quarter of that spending was transparent. So these trends are all obviously very damaging and dangerous for a system of constitutional democracy. Here they're undermining free and fair elections, one of the pillars, obviously, of a constitutional democracy. They're also doing so in a targeted way. They're disproportionately harming specific groups, specifically minorities, low-income voters, students, and even elderly voters. And actually, over the past 3 years, we've actually seen a remarkable number of courts at both the state and federal level finding that the voting and redistricting rules are being put in place for the express purpose of reducing the political power, undermining participation of minority voters. And that's a real remarkable set of events. This is something that courts don't normally like to find. This obviously undermines political equality, another necessary component of constitutional democracy. But another troubling aspect of this is it undermines public trust in the fairness and equality of elections. So regardless of whether or not it actually impacts the outcome of the elections, it impacts people's trust in the outcome of those elections. And that's damaging also to democracy and will further weaken our institutions. And some very recent poll by Ipsos in July found that more than almost half of Americans believe that our elections now are fair. So that's a real startling number. And all of these trends are a reflection of a broader deterioration in the democratic values and culture. And I want to just highlight two. They draw off of some of what Ian was talking about. So the first is a deterioration in respect for facts and the use of misinformation as a tactic to gain advantage. And so we just heard reference to Donald Trump talking about falsely claiming that 3 million voters voted fraudulently in the 2016 election. He was not the first person to make up this anti-menace of voter fraud. All of these state laws cutting back access on voting were justified by that very same manufacturer of alarm over voter fraud, and they were authorized even by the courts. And back in 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court actually heard a case acknowledging that there was no problem with voter fraud, but still green-lighted states relying on that as a justification to regulate their elections. And the second is the deterioration of the idea of the notion of fair ground rules, same ground rules that apply to you and your opponents. And so in both the voting and redistricting context and increasingly in the judicial context, we're seeing temporary legislative majorities who take power and then changing the rules of the game into law to limit their power, insulate them from challenges. And this is happening at the state level as well, not just at the federal level. And not only does this violate the fundamental precept of democracy, but the logic that it's okay to use your temporary political power to aggrandize your power is not easily cabined. Now we're seeing it spill over into many other contexts. And the state of North Carolina, which maybe we'll get back to, is an object lesson of myriad ways in which a temporary legislative majority has actually tried to abuse power and lock in the power of the Republican Party, looking for not just with the vote suppression, not just with gerrymandering, but by cutting back the authority of the Supreme Court that's trying to rein in its power, by stripping powers of a governor of the opposite party as soon as that governor was elected. So the envelope is being pushed at the state level. And obviously we're seeing this logic taken to whole new extremes at the federal government level. And I think we'll probably be talking about that a lot today. For the closest analog, we're seeing the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the Commerce Department, all being enlisted now in the effort to actually help to tilt the electoral process. And there's a whole bunch of ways in which that's happening, which I'm happy to talk about. And obviously, at a higher, one step removed from that, we're seeing scandal after scandal of political power being used to benefit the personal and partisan interests of those who are currently in office. So to kind of end for now where Ian started, Donald Trump is not, it is only a symptom of a broader set of problems that are ailing our democracy. And he's maybe taking advantage of some of these cracks that we've seen in our armor, that it's been going on in building and state level for quite some time.
We're going to get back to a number of those points. Maybe I should hold it farther away. Congressman Edwards.
Thanks. Well, it's a delight to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to take part in this. I actually can sit down now and I am to just stop because everything that you two have said, I agree with. Let me try to make this a little broader and a little deeper. Is this coming? Yeah. So how about that?
Testing.
Maybe I have a naturalness about Well, I think I want to suggest, first of all, I spent when I was in Congress most of my time in foreign policy, so I care a lot about the stuff that we talked about, but I want to keep my focus locally in this country on American democracy, and I see the problems here as broader and deeper and more to than we generally think about. Donald Trump was not the cause, as evil as he is. He was not the cause of our problems. The problems preceded him, and they are not partisan, they are bipartisan. There are problems here within our democracy that have been eroding it for a long time, and that are continuing to erode it. So let me give a couple of examples here. First, I'm dedicating my new book, which I'm working on, to Copernicus, Galileo, and Charles Darwin. And what all three of them had in common was that what they held forth was greeted with, that everybody knows you're wrong. So we have a problem here to begin with the fact that we ignored George Washington. And we ignored James Madison. Washington's farewell address: do not create political parties. They will destroy you. Political party, nobody in this room can imagine a system of democracy without political parties because you've never known one. But all living organisms, including non-human organisms, eventually reach their natural state. What's the natural state of a political party? To gain power, to defeat the other guys, no matter what it takes. We are living in a state of tribalism, where you start with, what is my club going to gain by, what will hurt my club? How do we manage to come up with whatever will decimate those who disagree with us? Now, we are both a democracy and a republic. And in a democracy and a republic, what matters less than outcome, or what matters more than outcome, is process. Democracy is about process. It's about how you arrive at the decisions you make. And I have to tell you, people on the left and the right, liberal and Republican and Democrat, don't care a lot about process anymore. It's about what outcome am I going to get. You see that when you have fights over court nominations, when you have fights over legislation, with any kind of policy debate. I want the outcome that I'm going to, enjoy, regardless of what process it took to get there. So I am as concerned as all of you are about the effects of gerrymandering. When you hit this very well, the negative effects of gerrymandering. That started on the left in California with your Congressman Filbert, who invented the modern system of using the demographic divides to put power in your preferred party. I despise what is being done by the Republicans in Congress today, who learned it from Speaker Jim Wright of Texas, who made it impossible, for people of the other party to be heard, to offer amendments, to get their bills on the floor. So I think that we run a risk if we say, look, the problem is over there. The problem's not over there. The problem is with us. It's with the system that we allow to exist, and we're fine with it when it benefits the outcomes of the party that we prefer, and we're not fine with it when it comes from the other side. I have, let me say a word more about parties. Parties are designed in our minds. Are there any political scientists in here? Anybody who's taught political science? Well, I feel really. Because I never took the political science course, but it is the common view that what you have is you need parties because they narrow the field, and they get rid of the outliers, and they get rid of the crazy people, and they provide you at the end with people who have been vetted by the party, people who have, who are sane, who are responsible, whose values are beneficial to society. How's that working out for us? In addition to the party, the tribalism that comes from the party, we have become hyphenated Americans. Hyphenated. I am not a Jewish American. I am a Jew, period. And I'm a Republican, period. And I'm an American, period. You know, we are dividing ourselves and subdividing ourselves into those who, you know, are not, where can we find the difference? We used to look at in pluribus unum and say, out of all of us collectively, with all of our differences, our different experiences, our different religions, our different ethnicities, our different attitudes on all kinds of things, we were Americans together. We've lost that. You know, you refer to this. The people who think differently than we do are the enemy. They're the other country. They're the evil force. They're not just people who look at things a little bit differently than us, but they are people who we must squelch. We must resist. We must stop because they're different. You know, until we get back to the idea of us as a common American society, we're going to have a very hard time ever reclaiming the democracy that we once had. I have tried to avoid talking about something that people don't like to hear, which is about our institutional failures. Democracy depends on the public having trust and confidence that the system works. You referred to Romania. On the way here, I stopped in a bookstore and I picked up a copy of my friend Peter Georgescu's new book. Peter came over from Romania after persecution, first by the Nazis and then the communists. His new book is Capitalist Arrives, meaning capitalists start doing things that will preserve capitalism, which means don't just answer to people who own stock in your company, but think of yourself as part of the collective enterprise. What you owe to society, what you owe to the society that educates your workers, what you owe to the society that provides the roads and the airplanes and all the stuff that you use to make the profits that you make, and think about what you need to do in order to pay a living wage, a fair wage, a decent wage to your workers. Because your ideas are nothing without your workers. And there's nobody who can buy your product unless you pay them. And capitalism has become locked into the idea of short-term greed. How can we make more? How can we ship jobs overseas? How can we lay off workers? What can we do to, make more for us, no matter what the cost to society? I'm sure, and I love this place that they're hosting us, I'm sure the University of San Francisco is absolutely an outlier and not at all part of what I'm about to say. But our colleges and universities have thrown out humanities, civics, critical thinking, the things that make us thoughtful Americans capable of preserving the democracy in which we are in charge, because our schools have become low-tech schools. And they're brilliant at showing us how to be accountants and engineers and lawyers, but not at how to be citizens who think thoughtfully about the problems that we have. My background is journalism. I was a newspaper reporter and editor, and I have a journalism degree, and I believe in the free press, and it was was too revealing when Lester Lucas, who's since had other problems, at CBS, made a comment during the election that we don't know whether Donald Trump is good for America, but he's sure good for CBS, because all they were able to do to promote and show his speeches and all the other things so that he gained, but their bottom line grew. So it's the institutions, it's the media. I read the New York Times every day. I read the Washington Post every day. I used to be a columnist for San Francisco Chronicle. And I love the media and I'm living it. But even in the Times, I read it today, and there is a slant in almost every story. And even though I agree usually with the slant, I usually agree with the biases in the stories. But there's a bias in the stories. And it is not difficult to see why there are people who question whether what the media is doing is giving them the straight scoop that they need. So let me end with this. You mentioned, thank you, my book, The Parties versus the People. At the Aspen Institute, I created a program that is designed to get past partisanship, to bring liberal and conservative, Republican and Democrat elected officials together in a fellowship program. Chris Nelson, who you mentioned before, the supervisor, is part of our program. So is Kamala Harris, Kevin De Leon, London Breed, who will be in our next class, Gavin Newsom, Eric Garcetti, Sam Liccardo down in San Jose, and all over the country, the Republican governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, Republican members of Congress. So we are building, you said we're going to get to the good part. We are beginning to build a political cadre, more than 300 now, who are committed to working together across party lines, across ideological lines, in order to collectively identify and solve the problems that we Americans share in common. And that's what we have to do.
Thank you so much. Is this working? This is no longer squealing, so I think I'll use it. Maybe it was my voice. So many points of common concern here. And let me just start with one. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion here, but are there mics for the audience? How are we handling that? Because we're going to incorporate your questions in as well. I'm not sure, are we going to pass around? Okay, we can pass mics here. All right. So, Ian, both you and Congressman Edwards talked about the relationship between the working people and the companies and the political system. You noted the job scarcity, the decrease in jobs available. You noted the living wage issue. Here in California, the Irvine Foundation just did a survey, and they found that 59% of the surveyed employed Californians are dealing with poverty issues, with a long list ranging from immigration problems, transportation, child care, health, payday loan relationships, and so on. Is this part of the factor here? This disenfranchisement, the sense that the democratic system is not delivering for a certain segment of the population. We certainly saw this in the angry voters in red states that supported President Trump. And what can we do about this?
So, a lot of that I mentioned, that statistic that I mentioned earlier, that we've gone from 1 in 16 Americans being supportive of military rule to 1 in 6, and then a lot of it is driven by millennials. So why is that? I thought millennials were this kind of progressive, forward-thinking generation, and that's true on matters of policy. If you look at the ideological spectrum, they tend to prefer more progressive policies. But that doesn't mean, to Mickey's point, that they are invested in preserving the process that gets those outcomes. Now, why might that be? Now, I think the scholars are just starting to unpack those numbers and trying to figure out what's underneath them, but I think where do you begin to hit on what's underneath them? So compare a American who grew up during the Cold War. Perhaps their parents told them about the Depression of World War II. They lived through the golden era of American capitalism in the latter half of the 20th century, when America's growth rates topped those of any around the world. They knew that they were guaranteed to have a better quality of life than their parents had. And while that was happening, they could compare all of this positive lived experience in the United States democracy with what they were seeing in the communist parts of the world where that was not the case. And so you had this very stark comparison that was our system is delivering the goods, that system is not. Now imagine that you're born in the 9/11 generation. Your first formative memory may be of those buildings coming down, watching YouTube videos of people having their heads chopped off, while scarcity is starting to affect American capitalism and the American economy. You do not have any guarantee. In fact, you suspect you will probably not live a quality of life that's better than your parents. If anything, a high crippling student debt, if you're lucky enough to go to college at all, may push you back into your parents' house after you graduate. You're looking at these numbers that suggest automation is going to remove some significant percentage of American jobs in the next generation. While all that's going on, whether it be under a President Obama, when you look at Congress about to default on the debt ceiling and inflict a self-inflicted wound because we simply can't get along, or you see the election of Donald Trump, you look at Washington and you say, well, this isn't working. If that is your lived experience, it's no wonder that you think, well, maybe there's another form of government that works better. It's no wonder that you haven't quite bought into yet the famous Churchill quote about democracy being the worst form of government except for all of the rest. And so part of what we need to do, I think, is there is to Mickey's point, there's an educational aspect of this for the next generation, which is, you're right, democracy is hard, it's messy, it's ugly, it doesn't always work. We don't run our families as democracies, we don't run our businesses as democracies. It's no wonder that people are questioning whether there's a good way for systems to work, but it is better than what people are experiencing in Egypt or in Turkey, where your brother was abducted because he was engaged in artwork that was critical of the governing regime. That's not a system we want to live in, and I think we need to remind younger Americans that that really is what an alternative might look like.
Any thoughts?
If you look at the people who voted for the current president, you find an awful lot of people who worry that if their car breaks down, they can't afford to get it fixed, who worry that their children are not going to have a place to work, who worry that if they get sick, they'll just, take aspirin and hope it goes away because they can't afford to go to the doctor. So, totally agree with what Ian said. The system that most of us are lucky enough to find beneficial doesn't work for an awful lot of people. There have been so many factors that we have not prepared for. The effects of globalization, the effects of technology. It's not a matter of being against technology or against globalization. It's a matter of knowing it's coming and what the impact is going to be on various kinds of societies and how you prepare for that. One of the problems when we talk about the partisanship is that it has resulted in a Congress that doesn't do its job. In fact, a Congress that I'm embarrassed now to even tell people I was part of, because it has failed in so many ways because of the party divide to meet its most basic responsibilities. Congress has given away its constitutional obligation to be the branch of government that decides when we go to war. The tariffs that are being imposed right now are because Congress is authorized as the only part of government by the Constitution to decide on the rules training, but they gave that away to the executive branch. So we have a non-functioning Congress that is supposed to be how we govern, how we keep control of what our government does. And it doesn't work because it's now so riven by partisanship and passing the buck that if you're a Republican majority and the Democrats are in the White House, you know, your job is just, as Mitch McConnell famously said, stop them. I didn't want to stop Barack Obama. He was president of the United States. I wanted him to be successful, so we'd all be successful. But that doesn't happen anymore. So just add to that, you're absolutely right. If you grew up in the last 10 years, 15 years, and that's what you knew, I can guarantee all of you would say, is this the best we can do?
Let's turn to representation. And I wanted, before asking Wendy to talk about this a little bit, I wanted to mention an entire area of research that the Rand Corporation has studied. They're studying what they call truth decay. And it is the use of disinformation and fake news and essentially analyzing where it's coming from. They have a number of studies going on in this area, really sort of unpacking this whole phenomenon in our society and prior historical periods where it has occurred, how it's come to an end, and so on. So I recommend that. It's free. It's on the RAND website. It's a continuing area of research, really a scholarly effort to look at the misinformation and so on. What I'd like to ask you about is reapportionment. What do you think of California's Citizens Commission on districting? Is that a good model for the rest of the country? How can it spread if it is?
Absolutely. And when I get to the good news, California actually has quite a bit of good news in terms of, I mentioned sort of all of the negative trends where we're sort of going backwards in terms of fair elections and other democratic indicators. At the same time, we actually have seen a lot of positive momentum in many states across the country towards improving our voting system, our system of representation. And California has two great innovations that I'll just highlight that are really models for the rest of the country. So the first is the California Redistricting Commission. I think at this point it's there's quite a broad consensus among those who study this that this actually works really quite well, not only at reducing the hyper-partisanship and the skew of gerrymandering in the system, but at delivering fair representation for a whole range of communities and across the state of California, and others are looking to emulate this. And I'll turn later to talk about some of the ballot initiatives across the country, but there were several that are actually looking to model after the California Commission. There's federal legislation trying to set up that model nationwide as well. The other one I just wanted to highlight, and we're going to hear more about it, I think, with the next speaker, is the automatic voter registration system, which is having some, despite glitches, is still a great innovation and a real model for the country as well. It is now one of 13 states in D.C. that have adopted automatic voter registration, which I think is going to be really revolutionize our voter registration system. We have among the lowest voter registration rates among the world's democracies, and the small switch of moving from an opt-in system to an opt-out system where voters actually are, when the government knows that you're an eligible citizen and you interact with the government, they put you on the voter rolls unless you opt out, actually has a real measurable and dramatic impact on registration rates and on participation rates, and that's been, California was an early innovator here. So I would say that these are really two positive developments, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot more momentum around these reforms, hopefully coming after this next election.
Okay. On to our Q&A. So there's a mic circulating. Right, this gentleman in the blue shirt has it. So hold up your hand and direct your questions to any or all of the panelists.
I was wondering how the growth of independent voters affects the democracy. So does the growth of people who are registering as independent, so does that affect the bipartisan?
One of the good signs is that over 42% of Americans today are registered as independents. I have predicted, maybe it's because I wish for it, but I predicted that 20, 30 years from now we won't have a political party system like we have now. So I'm from Oklahoma, but I live now in Massachusetts, which everybody thinks of as a big Democratic state. There are a lot more independents in Massachusetts than there are Democrats. This is the millennials. I don't know. Well, actually, I'm looking out at the sea of millennials here. So I know that you as millennials don't buy CDs, right? You don't want to be told you have to get all of this. You just pick what you choose. Millennials are the a la carte generation, and they're not going to be choosing from menu A, the Democratic menu, or menu B, the Republican menu. They want to be able to be free to pick and choose among all the various options they have. One of the things that will be among the first to go, by the way, and again, a salute to California, is the party primary system. Because California has managed, whether you like the system totally or not, gotten away from the system in Utah, where Robert Bennett's career as a U.S. Senator ended because of the votes of 0.1% of the population in a convention, or in Texas, where Ted Cruz got to be the only Republican on the ballot in a Republican state because of the votes of 2% of the population in a primary. That's true in 46 states. So the new generations aren't going to put up with that. And so I think California's been a trailblazer. Top two may not be the only way to get at this, but it's a real step forward from what it is in the other states.
A footnote to that, in terms of candidates being able to run as independents, we're not focusing just on California, but your former colleague Tom Campbell informed me that you cannot run on the ballot in California as an independent, because there was a concern years ago that it would be confused with George Wallace's American Independent Party, and so it was banned as a ballot identification, something that needs to be fixed in some way so that we can have independent candidates listed as independent on the California ballot.
I want to ask, probably Mickey, you would be the one to answer this question. I'm wondering, when Social Security was created, there was a cap, I'm assuming. Why not get more money into Social Security by just removing the cap? It seems to me very simple.
I think you probably chose me because I'm maybe the oldest person here.
Because you were on the Congress.
Yeah.
And also
Right.
because you're my husband's relative.
Really?
That's Nora's son.
Oh, you're kidding me. I didn't, wow. We got a family reunion. I actually don't know the answer to that because I don't have any expertise on how the system works. But so I appreciate you thinking I would know, but I don't.
Whoever gets the mic first.
Good morning. Thank you.
Stand up.
Thank you very much. I have a question particularly for Mickey, but anybody who can answer it is fine. But Mickey said that the capitalists are nothing without the workers, and their ideas are nothing without those that carry it out are the workers. To me, it sounds, and I don't mind, rather socialist. So I would like for you to explain how that fits in the current system, or not. Thank you.
No, it's not socialism, it's capitalism. It's capitalism as it is supposed to be. It is capitalists who understand, for example, corporate America. Corporations are government-created entities. It is a system by which the government grants immunities, protections, to groups of people when they form together as a corporation in order to help them do things that will presumably lead to the public betterment in producing better products, in creating jobs. The idea is you create jobs, and that allows people to be able to buy your products, and allows them to, you're part of the system. There is nothing about, Milton Friedman created this. He created it with the idea that all that matters for a corporation is maximizing profit to the shareholders. That's nonsense. It's absurd. The fact that, getting a little bit off of that into Citizens United, the idea that corporations are people. No, they're not. I mean, I don't know what the Supreme Court justices were smoking at the time. Because the laws are different. So a corporation is not a person. It is created by government for the purpose of giving benefit back to the community. That's why they were created. So no, that's not socialism. That's capitalism as it was meant to be.
I just want to say thank you to the panelists and also to JCRC for putting on this event, which is, for me, terribly helpful, and I'm enjoying just a quiet level of discourse without the, I think, goes with it. So my question is, that you mentioned
to make it on Fox News.
that you mentioned everything goes to its natural state. And that's people. So my head keeps going back to none of this goes without people. We are not a tribe, we are nothing. We are individuals who choose, and by free will and choice, choose to behave the way that creates where we are. And so I keep on going back that it's whether we're looking at any side of the aisle, we're looking at people making choices for the ultimate sort of where we want to be, which is power and greed. And so when we start attacking that as a system coming up for education-wise, children-wise, because they're adults making choices that they know better, or they should, but still making choices, whatever that looks like, become ideal. But so I'm struggling with that, and I'm wondering if you can help me. I don't know if it relates to anybody else, and we can take it offline if it doesn't.
Sure. This is one of the things I think we have to be a little bit hopeful about, which is that I think if you look back at our history is a little of cycles, where a crisis all of a sudden produces a response that comes from the people. So in the wake of Watergate, the American people came together and through their Congress passed a host of reforms that were passed on a bipartisan basis that were designed to essentially say, what was that and how do we prevent that from happening again? So you have things like the Ethics in Government Act that came out, you have things like the Privacy Act, you have things like the War Powers Act, you have things like the Church Commission. All the Americans responded to essentially a virus that had gotten into our body politic and working like antibodies to get the virus out. And I think we're now on the precipice of possibly having another one of these moments where, yes, the people have been making these choices and something terrible has come of it that I think is going to cause a lot of people to say, perhaps we need to do something to remedy this. And this is not just wishful thinking. One of the things that actually we found to be one of the most hopeful moments of the last 2 years was actually during the transition between the election of Donald Trump and his inauguration. When Trump worked with members of Congress to gut an obscure office within the Congress called the Office of Congressional Ethics. Now, as Nikki can probably tell you, if you're running for office or you're running campaigns, most political strategists will tell you, don't run on process issues. Nobody likes process issues. Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, a wonderful senator, said to me at one point, he walks across the state every year and not at a single breakfast table that he sits down at does someone talk to him about a process issue. And yet, when the New York Times broke a story about Congress considering gutting the Office of Congressional Ethics, members of Congress reported that their phones were flooded with Americans calling in and telling them to stop, and indeed they backed up.
It was a moment where, because we had lived through about a year of questions about the potential conflicts of interest of the president-elect, a set of scandal, corruption scandals among members of Congress, people were all of a sudden much more responsive to an attack on an obscure office about ethics than they ever would have been otherwise. And this makes us believe, and Wendy's group, the Brennan Center, and our group have been working on projects to say, we're going to have a moment in the very near future when hopefully a window like the post-Nixon window will open, and Americans will actually be able to work with their Congress to enact a set of reforms to essentially say, what just happened, and how do we prevent that from happening again? So Protect Democracy has put out a document, we put it on July 4th of this year, called the Roadmap to Renewal, a legislative blueprint for restoring our democracy. We very deliberately made sure that when it came out on July 4th, the first two outlets to say positive things about it were the very conservative National Review and the very liberal MoveOn.org. Because we wanted to emphasize that in this window that we hope will open, we need to be able to work together again on reinforcing and strengthening the guardrails of our democracy. So that's at roadmapforrenewal.com, you can check it out. And then we've been working with the Brennan Center, and Wendy can talk about this, to make sure that we're not the only group putting this out, because I promise you, I think we've got a very good organization, but a 23-person nonprofit is not going to save our democracy. It's going to have to be a movement of these efforts, and I know Wendy's group is working on some as well, so we'll let Wendy talk about that too.
I just wanted to add that it's people, the people also operating through and constrained through institutions. And I think that that's another area to focus on. What we've seen a decay in our democratic institutions, in part because of all these individual decisions and greed and power hungriness. But part of what we can look at is shoring up those institutions to help rein in our baser instincts and bring out our more civic-minded instincts, which we do have. And I'd say that's a lot of what you will see in the blueprint for reform that Ian talked about in these two documents that I'm holding up, the one by the Brennan Center, How We Restore Democracy, and the other by our National Task Force on Rule of Law and Democracy, which is co-chaired by former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara and former New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman. I'd say that the institutions is really an area where we want to focus, in addition to also focusing on all of us, the people.
If I could just add briefly, we're in an era of tremendous complexity, where there have been very significant changes in the way our economy and our society work due to technology and other factors. So to dissect what's going on takes a very strong media to convey to people what the issues are and what the stakes are and explain them. Our media, traditional media, has had a non-financially viable model in its traditional role to investigate and explain and so on. It also requires very good elected representatives who are able to weather the storm in the Congress of the great partisanship and explain to people. We have an economy now where a lot of people are managed by an algorithm. 10% of the California workforce is in the gig economy. So these are just major changes that are going on that create effects, and a lot of people don't understand and what kinds of policies have to be made and how to keep up with the changes in our society. So that is a major factor. We need people, whether they're reporters or politicians, who can understand and explain in a nonpartisan way.
Am I hearing that the failings of capitalism are causing the demise of democracy?
Well, what you heard from me is that the failings of capitalism, the failings of the colleges and universities and high schools, the failings of the political party system, the failings of the media, have all contributed. And as well as, I don't know how many people in this room, this is a very different kind of a group, so most audiences I would speak to, if the people were honest, and I would ask, how many of you, voted in in an interim election? How many of you knocked on doors? How many of you contributed to a candidate? How many of you have gone to a meeting with your congressman? You know, the number of people who participate actively, you know, as the old saying goes, history, democracy is not a spectator sport, and we have it going on with too many spectators and not enough players. So, yeah, I'm saying that the failures of the shareholder value short-term greed approach to capitalism, not all corporations are that way. You know, not all capitalists are that way, but too many of them. That's a piece of it, yes.
We're about out of time. There'll be many sessions later in which questions can be asked and answered. Let's do a quick lightning round here from each of our panelists. One thing that you'd like to leave with the participants today is they can do to remedy or address the problems that each of you have identified. Starting with
So I promise that there will be hope where there is. Although a small nonprofit cannot alone save our democracy, we've created one that is having a pretty profound impact. So I mentioned the 6 things that we need to worry about in terms of preventing the autocratic blueprint from happening here. We have a team of about 23 people, incredible lawyers, organizers, policy advocates. We work with a clinic at Harvard Law School, partner with many of the best law firms around the country, and we're starting to put up some wins. So working with the Brennan Center for Justice, we helped to shut down the so-called Pence-Kovac Voter Integrity Commission, which was President Trump's immediate attempt to begin suppressing votes through a government outlet. We worked with the Brennan Center, we shut it down. Just recently, that last week, the Ninth Circuit, which is the federal appeals court here in California, upheld our efforts to get a special prosecutor appointed to challenge the pardon that was given to Sheriff Joe Arpaio because it's a pardon that is unconstitutional. Also last week, a petition that we filed in court in D.C. to unseal one of the last remaining secret documents from the Watergate era, the so-called roadmap that Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski had sent to Congress. We asked for it to be unsealed because we think it can be an important precedent for Robert Mueller, and the court agreed to unseal it. Now, what can we do here? Why is all this good? Because all of these efforts were fairly long-shot legal efforts that were only made possible because they were echoed by the public coming out and saying, these ideas are right, they're smart, and we care about them. The Brown versus Board of Education did not desegregate schools. It was a tool in a broader effort that was in tandem with all sorts of organizing and public mobilization that got Dwight Eisenhower or the National Guard to protect the Little Rock neighborhood of that school. And so we're going to be filing a lawsuit this week. Watch out for it, I'm telling you now. And when we do, it is going to be a moment when we need people to stand up and say, it's a lawsuit on behalf of writers and journalists standing up against First Amendment violations. And when we do, we are going to need people to stand up and say, I stand with those writers and journalists. I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in this lawsuit. Because the law is not created in a vacuum, and judges don't create in a vacuum. They judge against a backdrop of people standing up. So we are at protectdemocracy.org. If you go there, you can sign up to receive a note when we put this lawsuit out, and we'll ask you to stand with us, because that's how change happens. It happens through integration of institutions and advocacy efforts and people like people in this room standing up together. So I look forward to doing that with you. I do believe we can come out of this one stronger.
That's a great to do. What's on your to-do list for this group?
Well, there are a few things, but one, get off the sidelines. Get involved, and some of you ought to be running for office. Others of you actively working in campaigns. So it's not a lot of the people who you've been reading about in the papers recently, because it's a Democratic year, hopefully, that you've been reading about people like Stacey Abrams in Georgia and Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts, Andrew Gillen in Florida. They're all part of this program that I run. And it's all part of getting past partisanship. So one of the things I suggest is all of you who watch Fox, I'm sure there may be one here, turn it off. And it's the same thing with MSNBC, even though I'm on MSNBC a lot. Get out of your silence to people who think differently. Understand the people who think differently. Invite over to your house for dinner a group of 7 or 8 or 10 people, Carol and Lucasmeyer will talk about this later, who have different perspectives, different points of view, and just talk to each other, listen to each other. We have got to get out of this tribalism, this us against you, where we're Americans together. And unless we recreate that, and the only way we can do it is getting out and working with and meeting and understanding where other people are coming from and why they're coming from. Very few people out here that want to see anybody starve. There are very few people here who are eager to see, people suffer. But there are different approaches to how to solve the problem. My friend Jonathan Haidt in NYU writes a lot about the fact that people on the left and the right have a very common set of values. They may order their priority differently. One group may put stability and order higher and equality a little bit lower, and then the other group the opposite. But let's get back to all being Americans. Forget the hyphen. I could care less about what kind of hyphenated, subdivided American you are. Let's just become Americans together, and we can get out of this.
I'm going to echo the sentiments that what you're doing here today is the start of what I hope that you will continue to do, which is, again, stay off the sidelines and get involved. So I'll start with voter participation. This morning's Washington Post had a very hopeful article about the unprecedented enthusiasm for participating in this year's midterms. Let's actually turn that into massive mobilization. Register people to vote. Make sure that you and everyone you know and in your family is voting and participating. Let's actually bring our level of participation back up to what our democracy should be. Reform, support, you can actually be an agent of making the system work better. Not just by calling for reform, supporting your public officials who are trying to get reform, supporting organizations that are trying to get reform, but become a poll worker, run for public office. Support the now myriad ballot initiatives that are going on across the country and that have gone on here as well to bring about reform so that the system is fair. And I just want to say just how hopeful it is. The unprecedented number of ballot initiatives that are going on in this election on democracy issues, where more than 2 million Americans had to actually sign petitions in order to get these petitions for reform in the voting process, redistricting process, in many as 10 states across the country, the Florida Rights Restoration Initiative, the redistricting reform initiatives, and other automatic voter registration initiatives. That's a real positive momentum, that I hope that you can support. And then support the organizations, form organizations, and stay engaged to actually bring about these visions that hopefully we're going to have an opportunity to bring about after this conference.
Thank you, Wendy. So, 242 years ago, our forebears were waging war to establish the world's first democracy. Building democracy. Now, 242 years later, we do have to wage democracy. The title of the conference is excellent. We've heard a number of ways in which we can do it. Let's get to it. Thank you to Wendy, Ian, and Congressman Edwards. Thank you all for being here, and this session is closed.